1929 में शहीद भगत सिंह ने जेल में अपनी डायरी में गाढ़ी स्याही से लिखा था, डोंट आस्क फॉर राइट्स, टेक देम। 90 साल बाद फेसबुक की सीओओ शेरिल सैंडबर्ग ने इस सत्य को अलग शब्दों में कहा। उन्होंने कहा, सोशल राइट्स आर नेवर हैंडेड आउट, they are seized. What both these people were voicing is an eternal truth. The truth that the onus for fighting discrimination lies upon the person who is discriminated against. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so proud that we have in today's panel 3 women who've kept storming these so-called male bastions and done what they've intended to do. I'll introduce these panelists one by one, and I'll request them to take their places on the stage as I introduce them. Our first panelist is Ms Shruti Jain. She's an award-winning global marketing and communications professional with over 25 years of experience, both on the client side and the agency side. She's held several global C-suite positions in HR, marketing, communications, sustainability, solutioning, diversity, etc., in multinational conglomerates, including the EXL services. She's also led several advertising agencies. She was president of Dentsu. She was a part of Ogilvy, Mudra, Rediffusion. And other than being a thoroughbred corporate honcho, she's been teaching as an external faculty for the last 20 years. She has authored a book on advertising along with University Oxford publications, and she's a gold medalist from Indian Institute of Mass Communication. She's also an alumnus of ISB Hyderabad, IIM Ahmedabad, and Harvard Business School, Boston. We are so proud and privileged to have you here, ma'am. Please come up on the stage and take your seat. Our second panelist is Ms Ms Subramanian. She's the founder and co-director of Arambh India Initiative, India's first online resource portal on child sexual abuse and exploitation. Arambh channelizes the work, information, and discussion on the issue of the larger context of child protection in India and across the globe. A graduate in microbiology and environment sciences, she has studied social entrepreneurship from INSEAD, France. She has extensive work in dealing with children, including her stints in ADM Capital Foundation and India's largest NGO for teaching underprivileged students, that is Pratham. Her Twitter profile rightly introduces her as an unapologetic feminist and child rights activist. It's a pleasure, Uma, to have you here. Please come up on stage. Our final panelist is a surprisingly young and smart woman, country representative for the United Nations. She is a representative for India, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. And prior to her career in the UN, she worked in firms such as KPMG and American Express as economist. A master's degree holder in international business from the University of Nottingham, she is a strong votary of mainstreaming women in marketplace, workplace, and community. Welcome, Nishtha. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm your moderator for today. My name is Sonal Singh. So my first question will be to Ms. Jain. Considering that you are the corporate CEO that so many of us are probably gunning to be, at least I am. So we know that it makes a lot of bottom line sense, economic sense, to have women on the top. Companies like JP Morgan and Alibaba, who have 30% of women leadership, go on to do well in profits as well as make it a better company for men and for women. However, on the other side, we have women dropping out of workforce. We have increased cost of social security. We have increased cost of maternity law. So how is HR looking at the hiring function? You've been the head of HR as well.
So I think that's the absolutely wrong way of approaching it. Hiring is not our problem. Look at this room here. Look at the world outside. There are women everywhere, achieving, surviving, thriving, doing very well for themselves. The problem starts in the retention phase. We are not able to retain the workforce. And why does that happen? That has nothing to do with the workplace. It has everything to do with what's happening back at home. You get married, starting with a simple thing like a name change, right? There's this huge thing that you undergo. There's a huge HR process. in getting from being a Ms. to a Mrs. God forbid you become a divorcee. And I had one friend a couple of years back who's one day calling me up from work and saying, I'm melting down here. And she's howling on the phone. Perfectly fine lady of 20 years of experience, howling on the phone. She'd recently been through a divorce. The paperwork that she had to undertake at work was killing her. Handling the fact that she had to go through this process, answerable to men around her, people around her, why she's going through the change, was ridiculous. And I think that's where HR steps in. We have policies which are company-friendly always. HR is supposed to be the spokesperson for the employees. But what happens typically is we are only looking at it from the company's perspective. We forget half the workforce is made up of women. So when we make our policies in the good old days, they were always made from a company's perspective. Then came this wave of feminism. And that's where we lost the plot. Because what we did was, we actually made the men even more threatened and insecure than they already were. Please understand, they'd lost the bastion at home. Women were in charge at home. The workplace was their bastion. And suddenly here was this wave of women walking in, storming every bastion, which of course they were very happy about. But what happened to the man in the process? He started feeling, मेरे लिए कौन सी जगह बची है? Where am I going to go? And on top of that, you made policies like maternity leave, and there are countries which have 6 weeks, 6 months. There are other countries which have 4 years of maternity leave. There was a time we wanted to move to that country, that's a different matter. But the point is, we forget in equality, we've tried to create this instability. समझ में आया कि आप इतने इस तरफ थे कि आपको बैलेंस करने के लिए इस तरफ जाना पड़ा. But अब हो चुका टाइम. Come back to an even keel. We need balance. I think the best thing that happened for feminism was the paternity leave. Because suddenly men were told, you're equally responsible at home as you are at workplace. I kept creating policies for women. I kept making men feel more threatened. I kept increasing the imbalance at work. And that's why things like that happen. There's a very famous study of Harvard. 50% of Harvard graduates, women graduates, have dropped out of work. We're talking of the best school in the world for business. Girls, women, ladies coming out of a place like that, which will give an arm and a leg to get into, are stepping out of the workforce. There's clearly something wrong. It's not just in our country, it's everywhere. You see it everywhere. The more you create policies which are favorable to women, the more you're setting them up for failure. You are resented, you are hated, you are bitched behind your back, and you don't know how to handle it. The simplest thing to do is just go out there and do your work. You want equality? Behave equal.
Yes, that calls for an applause.
You think men don't have problems? You think men don't have challenges? You think they don't have issues to deal with? Life is sacrifice. अब आप पैदा हुए हैं तो झेलना तो पड़ेगा. Right? The point is, why are you holding somebody else responsible for your fate? You were made a woman, celebrate it, enjoy it, thrive in it. Don't look to others. When we started workplace, like ma'am just said, there were no policies favoring us. I started in advertising. I used to work till 2, 3 in the morning. We didn't have vehicles that we could drive back on our own. That's a different matter that today, even that is being questioned. But we had to hail cabs. There were no services offered by your organization, not because they didn't want to, because nobody thought about it. But you didn't go weeping and crying and wailing and say, oh my God, how am I going to manage? You did what you had to. You earned your place. You didn't, when Sheryl Sandberg or whoever sees it, this is what she means. Don't wait for others to create a platform for you. You do a good job, even if you want 6 years off, they'll wait for you. Because you were good at what you did. You delivered things that others couldn't. Or you did it better than anybody else. You've secured your place. They'll wait for you. And that's the point that I think HR has to support women with. We mollycoddle women. That's not required. Look at the guts, yeah? I mean, we deliver children. Do you know what's the level of pain you go through when you do that? What is work? It's nothing in comparison. So why seek allowances? I've got a baby at home, I've got this. You've decided to work, you please organize it. Please marry someone or don't marry. I mean, that choice is yours. If you want a career, go out and get it for yourself. Nobody is entitled to anything if they have not earned it. Please don't hold the world around you responsible for your careers.
That was
That's all
lovely. Very well point made, is that let's not seek for allowances. Now, my next question is to you, Uma, because if so many women are dropping out of the workforce after childbirth, then it is because the purported reason that they want to look after their children. But in the book, Getting to 50-50, the author argues that children thrive, spouses thrive, and marriages thrive when both parents are full-time working. So if mothers are giving up careers for their children, is it actually helping children? You work with children. Is it worth the sacrifice?
Okay, I just want to say that this question is slightly problematic because it insinuates some form of guilt among women,
Correct.
right, and mothers. But before we start that, I would like to say that when we talk of equality, first let's talk of equity, which is that if we, as men and women, are a part of this game, are the rules same? If the rules are, then we can do away with everything that my co-panelist pointed out. And if they are not, then probably we still need it. Now, going back to your question around motherhood, I want to ask all the women sitting in this room, when we decided to have our children, was it your own choice? Or was it a choice of your partner, your husband, the mummy ji, the tau ji, the auntie ji, the uncle ji who live around us? Can you answer me this question? Was it only your choice? Can I have that louder? Thank you very much. So when we are saying that motherhood is a social construct where it's not the woman's choice, it's not her choice alone, how can we say that then it's her responsibility to bring up the child by herself? Now the point here is, there's a very famous quote that we use in child rights, which says, it takes a village to raise a child. But the village disappears as soon as a child is born. Especially in a country like India. And then you are put in a situation where you have to choose. And that is unfair, right? So we have to question the larger construct of motherhood and who decides for women who choose to have children or who don't choose to have children for that matter. And going back to your question, do children thrive if their mothers are at home? I would again say that it's a completely personal decision that a woman makes, but as long as she has the choice to make that decision in full awareness of her surroundings, because certain women don't have that. Now, I was raised by a mother who worked for 38 years, and I think I turned out to be okay. There are certain issues, but I'm okay. Now, I am raising a 2.5-year-old daughter, and I resumed work when she was 45 days old. And I hope she's turning out to be okay as well. So I think it's really your own decision, but you cannot put the ownership on women to raise children, and you cannot make them feel guilty. And when I say you, it's the society around us. So if we can't create the village, don't blame the woman.
So thank you for making that point that full-time parenthood is a very important and a respectable profession as well. In fact, that is helping us rear children who are going to be the future of the society, hence determine the future of our lives. So my next question is to you, Nishtha, is that since it is full-time parenthood, whether by a man or a woman, is not a GDP activity, it does not include any cash flow, should the state look at making it a profession, a genuine career option for which the state can pay men and women?
Whoa. First, I'd like to start with my introduction. You introduced me by saying surprisingly young, talented. I think there's nothing surprising about a young, talented woman, just like there's nothing surprising about a young, talented man. It shouldn't be a matter of surprise in the age that we live in. I think they've existed for much more before than I have, clearly. Now, again, your question has many parts. Should the state pay for parenthood? I think the state should pay for many things, right? But we here and globally have found a very convenient way in which women subsidize global growth. The current model of economic development that countries are following is a model where women use their time, use their talent to subsidize global growth. The family system or your happiness index, or the stability of family institutions, is a very important component of the stability of the economy. But it is not happening at no cost right now. Can we put a dollar figure to that? I think we've been in advocacy forever to measure women's unpaid work, both in rural spaces and both in urban spaces. Women spend almost 3 times as much as men do in unpaid work. Now, why is unpaid work a problem? Unpaid work is a problem in the economic model that we have developed for ourselves. Because as long as you're not able to put a dollar figure or a worth to what someone brings to the table, it doesn't constitute for the respect and value that they earn in a society. A very good example is if you go to households, you'll always find women sewing the button. Not that I have ever, but in many of our households. The moment it is done by a man, and it is to be paid for, there are only male darzis outside. We have to, as an economy, start talking. I think paying for unpaid work, we might be far, far away from that. But what we definitely need to start doing is to start measuring unpaid work and its contribution to GDP. Because that's the fundamental reason for why men are valued more, why there is more value to a man's life than to a girl's life. And women do subsidize a lot of growth like that. The other point that I do want to make is in some of the earlier questions that we have had. Again, I do want to second that point because I think I'm paid to do this actually. It is absolutely, it's true that without personal will, if I don't want to get out of that household, if I don't want to break ceilings, very few things are going to help me. But it is also true that the onus of doing that is not just on the woman. Just because the burden that she has earned in being in society is not hers. She is born into it. I think we must get out of convenient arguments to say that the fact that there aren't as many women in the parliament as men, there aren't as many women in decision-making roles as men, is actually just default settings. It's like that because capable women have not made the effort. These are design settings. There is a lot working at play to keep women out of the system. It's not the woman herself. So when you look at bringing in change, as much as there is onus on the woman to make that change, it is the onus of companies, it is the onus of the state, it is the onus of stakeholders like us, it is the onus of men, and it is the onus of women who've made that change to make sure that they share their stories like we heard in the morning, because it's truly inspiring to know how others broke that barrier. But I think we must be cautious in limiting and bringing down the burden of doing everything to the woman. And we get this argument everywhere we go. The moment particularly in rural settings, the moment we go and start talking about women's empowerment, there will be someone in the audience who puts up their hand and says, Madam, par aurat ki dushman to aurat hi hai.
They haven't seen boardroom egos at 5 of men?
Well, I'm talking about rural spaces, right? So suddenly the mother-in-law is the 99 ka samp whose entire life is surrounded on bringing the other woman down. You have to understand this. The entire mother-in-law, daughter-in-law saga doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of patriarchy. That woman who is fighting against the woman is also groomed in that patriarchy. So when you look at women, you don't let us resist the tendency to put the onus on women as a conversation, because otherwise we will again say, "Kyunki औरत ने औरत के लिए काम नहीं किया, दुनिया नहीं बदली."
So your argument is that everybody works together, even if the primary energy comes from the woman.
Well, it is her will. I mean, you can't replace anything with personal will. But it is state responsibility as much as it's company responsibility, as much as it's peer responsibility, because it's everybody's problem. When there is gender equality, you're not just freeing women from their stereotypes, you're also freeing men from their stereotypes. When there is paternity or when there's equality at home, you're also allowing men to be equal stakeholders in the family. This entire notion of men don't want a family life, men don't want to spend their time with their children. No, they're absolutely miserable by being in office till 9. They miss their children. They spend their entire lives earning for or supporting a household, of which or where they do not get the same affection that a woman does because they have no time to give. So let us understand people in their entirety, particularly within companies. It will allow us to bring equality much faster.
Sure. So with this, these settings as they are, less than perfect, we have a group of women who are very ambitious, and let's say another group of women who've chosen to play down their careers, who've chosen to step back, maybe step out of their careers in order to bring up their children. So there are these two groups, one group of women trying to bring up their careers in a very nice manner, and they are always trying to prove to the world that my children are just fine, like you said. And then there is the other group, which is saying that, well, I had to give up my career because, see, now my children are getting the attention that they always deserved. So, Ms. Jain, what is your take on them? Because these groups are pitted against each other. They are judging each other.
Yeah, so that's actually the sad part. The very sad part is that, like she said, I mean, it's said in a rural context, but we see it playing out every day in our real lives as well. Our biggest enemies in growth have not been men, have been other women who succeeded before us. Why? Because the question asked is, I did it this way, what's your problem? Right? I fought my way through, you fight too. अरे भाई ठीक है, आपको थी, हिम्मत थी आप में लड़ने की, आप में था स्टील, मेरे में उतना नहीं है. So what do? I leave and I walk out. I take the easier path. I anyway have pressure at home. I anyway have pressure of society, the world, all the fancy things that we talk of in feminism. I just give in. Ki theek hai, let me compromise right now, let's go out. The question we need to ask ourselves, and I think this is beautifully being played out today in the corporate circles, is how other women have helped other women grow. So when we used to do these diversity programs, there were two things that we did, which I think is good to learn from. One was we expanded the agenda. It was no longer about gender equality. Why put unnecessary focus on one issue? We made it about diversity. Now, diversity includes many things. उसमें of course gender भी आता है, पर उसमें race, culture, creed, caste, sexual orientation सब आ जाता है, nationality सब आता है. So when you bring this into play, suddenly the world around you discovers, boss, it's an easier battle to get women in. अरे घी अगर सीधी उंगली से नहीं निकला है, थोड़ी टेढ़ी कर लो. So we expanded the agenda. Suddenly, everybody in the organizations, and then you see this across sectors, have welcomed women into the system. Why? Because to make, sort of physically, challenged people part of the system is far tougher. Let me take the easier path and still look good. I understand this is manipulation, but why does it hurt? As long as it's serving the larger cause. Now, when this happened, women started understanding that if there's a fraternity at work, even their lives become simpler. So organizations created women's networks. And what did these women's networks do? Exactly what you're doing here today, and which is why I agree with Ms. Mukherjee. We should applaud the Jindal Group. You're bringing women who have managed to fight that battle and get to some point. You're bringing them face to face with others who are fighting those battles currently. See, we've reached a place where we fought these battles, reconciled, nirvana stage has happened. कि भाई ये सारी चीजें होंगी, झेलनी है, I can still weave my way through. But we understand, when you're younger, these are new things. It feels like a battle you're fighting alone. So if we can put women who were the ones criticizing other younger lot, कि इनको इतना आसान मिल गया है, put them in charge of mentorship. अरे suddenly आपके ऊपर pressure पड़ जाता है. You have to say the right things. You have to do the right things. And that's how we created an ecosystem which helped. So the women who wore the pants at work, please understand, unfortunately for us women, if we had to enter the corporate world, we had to have very manly, sort of attributes. We had to be seen as, all the lovely words that we saw in your AV. I mean, that's too much pressure. Let me be. Why should I have all these adjectives attached to me? उसी से मर जाएगा इंसान. So, when you see women who have succeeded Despite the struggles, you feel encouraged. अरे इन्होंने कर लिया तो शायद मैं भी कर ले जाऊँ. इन्होंने अगर ये battle जीत ली तो शायद मैं भी कर ले जाऊँ. And you know, beautifully, this narrative started somewhere in the 80s through organizations and industries which welcomed women. And I must applaud the creative field for that. If you go into the creative field, you will find more women than men. So luckily for me, where I started, there were men feeling that they were being treated unequally. We had to do opposite things at that time. How do we get more men into the workforce? What a beautiful place to be, right? I'd love to live in that world where both the genders have to work to strive to earn their place. So your question is absolutely right, Sonal. The onus is around us, like everybody is saying. As long as I have the will and I have people supporting me, I will get somewhere. I may not be able to achieve the pinnacle, but I won't come back with a handful of dust either. And that's the premise we have to start with. Please don't everybody try and be a Sushmita Sen. Why can't you just be good at what you're doing? We're trying to create poster boys. We're not required to do that. Please live your life. Please want things for yourself that probably your mothers never wanted for themselves. And that's the change. Every day, if you think, how can I be better than I was the previous day? How can I inspire 2 people around me or 1 person around me? You've done your job. Onus is not on HR. Onus is not on others. It has to come from within. Yes, if I have a helping hand, I'll go further. But it's not going to stop my journey.
But still a very valid suggestion that people out there should seek out women mentors and men mentors who do believe in your capabilities. And the ones who are already at the senior level should be free and willing to extend that support to all those who want to come up in the game. So my next question is to Uma, because we know that gender stereotypes start manifesting since the very childhood. Girls are told to behave in a particular fashion. Being more aggressive, asking for their rights is not seen as a very girly thing to do. And we see men as more successful, so we expect men to be more successful than us. We see women managing households and chores and cooking, so we expect that that's what we will do when we grow up. So there would be more than 100 parents maybe in this hall, or even a 50. What will be your suggestion to them? How is it, what are the messages and what are the personality traits that you would like to bring their children up so that the world is fairer tomorrow?
I mean, I'm not an expert in parenting, but I can try. I think firstly, when we talk about a fair world, we have to think about why are we only talking in binaries of girls and boys? Because there could be people who identify themselves as neither girls nor boys, right? So a fair world has to be girls, boys, and much more. When it comes to actually talking about raising girls and boys, I think what is happening in the country, and when we see this across the board, urban and rural areas, is that girls and boys are being brought up in silos. Their worlds don't meet, but they're extremely curious about each other's worlds. So they go through this entire process, through their childhood, through their adolescence, without really colliding with each other. These worlds never collide with each other, not even come together. And when it does, there is a lot of confusion. And this is a problem with our socialization because we like to keep it separate, because we don't want to address the elephant in the room, which is sexuality among children and their idea of who they are. And when I say sexuality, parents, it's not about teaching children how to have sex. It's everything that you and me are. It's about values, it's about attitudes, it's about relationships, it's about passion, about gender expression, how we identify ourselves, and we don't talk to children about it. Because we think bachche Bhagwan ka roop hai and they're absolutely asexual. Inme sex ki koi, yeah, inme koi sexual bhavna nahi hoti hai. So I think the number one thing as parents that we'll have to do is first understand our own sexuality and be comfortable in our own skin and start talking to our girls and boys to address their issues when it comes to sexuality. That's the start. The other thing which I would like to also say is, especially to the girls, do not encourage them to be likable. And I think when girls and women start rejecting the notion of likability, it's just a better place. I mean, it's lesser guilt on us. The pressure is less on us because that likability is never put on men. I mean, there are other things on men, but this idea of you have to be adarsh in everything that you do. The adarsh beti, the adarsh bahu, the adarsh everything that you do is extremely
devi.
pressurizing and crushing, right? So I think the idea is to help our girls and boys reject the notion of likability and help them realize that this is who you are and this is how you will be. The third thing which I would like to tell parents is please understand that difference has to be viewed as normal. Because there will be people who are not like you. So girls can be told that these are boys and they're not like you. And boys can be told that these are girls and they're not like you. And it's normal. The moment you start looking at difference from a value lens, that is where the problem begins. Because then everything has a value attached to it, and then that is where the spiral goes downward. So yeah, I mean, for them to be who they are, I think as parents, we will have to really equip ourselves in understanding and addressing our own prejudices, biases, our sexualities, so that our children thrive in a world where they have the knowledge, information, and just a worldview where people are different, but they are normal.
So this point on likability is in fact very valid. There is a study done in the name of Harvard-Heady study, which says that likability and success are negatively correlated for women. You don't like successful women, but they are positively correlated for men. So now we'll move on to the theme of the event, which is by UN Women this time. When we talk about think equal is something that we've been talking for long. When you talk about building smart, how important is this discussion, especially in the infrastructure space? What are the challenges that we face there, and who are the key stakeholders that we must look at while having this discussion?
Yes, it's a very timely discussion because particularly in this phase of growth that India is going through where we're talking about nothing but infrastructure as this big road that is going to take us to inclusive growth. Infrastructure is a very, very key part. But the first recognition that we must have while we think about building smart is that infrastructure and urban planning is not gender neutral. Women consume public spaces much differently from how men consume public spaces. Women consume technology much differently from how men consume technology. The unfortunate bit is a lot of the public planning processes have been led by men. So there's been very little thinking of how differently would a highway be consumed by a woman. We don't even think in those lines because we think as long as it's serving men who are there, it's all fine. It's built from the lens of how men would use public infrastructure. And I'll give you a single example. When we were in this rush of building toilets all across the country, even at major airports, none of the male toilets had a nappy changing station. None. It took us 6 months of advocacy to actually get a nappy changing station in a male toilet. Now you have, ab kehne ko this is something very small. It may sound very irrelevant. But we have to understand that what is outside us has a huge role in reinforcing gender stereotypes.
It's like the absence of paternity leaves everywhere.
It's like the absence of paternity leaves. So everything that you have outside is going to reinforce. If the man cannot take the baby to the station, then you can't sit back outside and say, well, he does nothing to actually change nappies. Because you have infrastructure that doesn't enable for it. And therefore, I think when we talk urban, this is a really small example, but particularly when we talk about large-scale infrastructure, it is important for us to recognize that women experience cities and spaces much differently from how men do, purely because they also combine a lot of productive work and family work, particularly fragmenting time and space. I think it's a key characteristic of how women consume differently from men. And so for us, build smart. I think every time we've spoken about smart, we've kind of missed the definition of what would smart be. If smart is not smart for 50% of the population, then it's not smart. So when you say smart cities, if it doesn't deliver to the need of 50% of your population that actually uses public spaces much more than the other, you're not building a smart city. So this year, it's a focus around the globe. When I say around the globe, it's 193 member countries that make up the UN. There is a specific focus, and it's pronounced when it comes to India, because India is yet to see 60% of where its population will live and is yet to build those cities. I think it's a very important time in history for us to say this time when we think of infrastructure, we are going to not miss what 50% of the population demands from it.
Fair point. Now, I'll come to a very favorite subject of mine, which is marketing and communications, because that has been my domain. And a little mention fact here is that Shruti ma'am, who's now teaching at the Bennett University, was actually the most dreaded and loved college professor while I was at IAMC.
So I like that you said loved as well.
So, ma'am, in this marketing and communication, this entire picturization of women, we know that 80% of the buying decision rests with the woman of the house. So, naturally, a lot of thinking is going behind that. Earlier, of course, we had our fair share of women bathing on screen for men's pleasure and men taking all the wise financial decisions. Now there is a new wave, the third wave of femvertising. But if you scratch the surface, you see that they are only touching issues which are by and far acceptable. They are still not touching inheritance rights or the major religious and ritualistic discrimination against women. So now the focus of commodifying has actually moved from commodifying women into commodifying feminism. Do you think this is real feminism on screen or token feminism?
मैं पूछती हूँ क्या प्रॉब्लम है? कम से कम बात तो हो रही है. At least we are bringing the issues out in the open. Whether I'm doing it with a good heart, whether I'm doing it because I want to sell my product, how does it matter? You're getting an opportunity to create an agenda point, use it to your advantage. What are you doing here today? I mean, you said that right in the beginning. Why should only one day be dedicated to women? Yeah, मेरे तो 365 दिन है. Right? Why shouldn't I be celebrated every day? Why you need these days? Because at least you're bringing the point out in the open. The struggles of 364 days are being discussed today. All of us are congregating, putting our brains together, sharing our load, and that's how we'll go forward. So my point is, chahe jaise ho. Whether it was the little girl under the Shah, or it is the share the load today, the point is the conversation has moved. The needle movement has happened. What was the biggest thing that happened in 2016, Sonal? The Me Too movement. It came after 5,000 years of subjugation. But look at what women did across the world. They stood up and they told their stories. What gave them that energy? Because of the conversation around us. Now, I don't care whether that man is doing it because he actually cares for my rights or whether he's doing it because he wants to sound politically correct. Arey, bol to raha hai. Mujhe to mauka mila bolne ka. And that's all I seek. Just give me a platform. Just give me an opportunity. Because the women sitting in this room, the women out there in the world, that's all they need. Nothing is wrong with them. There is nothing stopping them. All they need is an opportunity. And femvertising ho, jo bhi ho, mujhe mauka mil raha hai. I think the hashtag MeToo movement came out of the conversation and the narrative that has been going on for the last decade. We couldn't have done it without this narrative. Even today, in whether it's family gatherings, whether it's professional gatherings, men will question that movement. The ones who were accused, of course, are definitely questioning it. They're, of course, pulling it down. But what has happened? A huge change has happened. Today, unlike in our generation, where we had to take this bullshit sitting quiet, we had to accept it. Today's girls, today's ladies, today's children, and I hope when you grow up, my dear girl, you will not face a world like that. Because women have found a voice. And now you can't take that back. अब मुझे बोलना आ गया ना.
So even that symbolism is very, very important.
It's very important. Symbolism is where everything starts. So you should rejoice कि symbolism हो रही है.
उतना तो हो रहा है कम से कम.
उतना हो रहा है.
Alright.
बाकी मैं कर लूँगी.
Nishtha, you have a point to make to that?
Yes, I do. देखिए सोच ये है कि बदलाव का जो दौर है उसमें आप दो चीज़ें कर सकते हैं. Either you can make it politically incorrect, or you can make the politically incorrect acceptable, or you can change what constitutes politically correct. Now, if men and the rest of the world have come to a point where it has become uncool to not support gender equality, so be it. because it's taken us 40, 50 years to get here, where nobody in an open room can stand up and say, I don't support this, because it's just too unfashionable. You're just too outdated if you don't support gender equality. And I think that we have not reached here without the women's movement. We have not reached here with those who have given and dedicated their lives to fighting these causes, who've put up their hands to come first to make that move. At least particularly within the world of advertising. You see, even within symbolism, among the 10 ads that are scratching the surface, there is one ad on menstruation which says, touch the achar. Now that definitely has religious cultural roots. So in the 10 ads that scratch the surface, you will have one that touches a very, very deep chord. And to me, that is the beginning of change, and it's great if it starts with symbolism. At least we have made it very, very uncool. At least we are moving beyond the ridiculous world where only men are writing ads where women during their periods, it is only on that day that she wants to wear white pants and white shirts and skip a rope. I have not known of a single woman who wants to do that on the day of her periods, because that is a man's idea of liberation of what things you can do. I mean, it's ridiculous, actually.
Yes,
So I am glad
thankfully
that
we are over that phase.
yeah,
at least,
so thankfully we've moved from being as ridiculous as that to actually reflecting what women feel, what women want. And we've got to a point of symbolism. I was jumping in my seat when the government of India had published the economic survey in pink paper as a gesture as a gesture of violence against women, right? And at that point, I was questioning myself, what is going to happen because they've published the economic survey in pink? But every single newspaper that reported it the next day had a mention of violence against women. So it does lead to greater awareness and advocacy. Whether those who have been waging war for it feel it's right or not right, or should we have, but it still starts a discourse amongst people, and I think that's a good starting point.
That's right. So my last question, that is the non-common question to the panel, is that you've been dealing with technology for a long time now. Aarambh India is a technical startup. So do you think technology will be a watershed development in promoting gender equality? Now that access to smartphones is universal, those 90% rural women still don't have access to smartphones. But does technology play the determinant?
No. I think technology cannot be sort of touted to be what it is. What technology has brought about is plurality. Whether it brings about equality or not is questionable. With plurality, what happens is you hear diverse voices. You hear diverse perspectives. You look at change. There is a possibility of change. So if you take an example of the Me Too, there was a wave of change. There was a possibility of change. There was a platform where women felt that they can actually go and start voicing their concern. Now, whether that actually translates to change, which is on-ground change of behavior, change of systems, the government becoming more responsible and responsive to victims, is yet to be seen. So that's why technology has to be supplemented with solid, on-ground, old-school social work principles, which is what even we do, for that matter. So even though we run the National Resource Center, which is an online resource portal which gives you information and deals with the issue of child sexual abuse with technology, we have a team of social workers, counselors, mental health experts who go on the ground and create this change, trainers who talk about patriarchy, talk about gender, in those areas of the country where probably people are still not able to go online and even voice their concerns. So yes, there is plurality, but no, not equality, because also remember, the fault lines that we see on the ground are the same fault lines that we see online, which means who is the most repressed on ground, right? Women, people from historically excluded communities, Dalits, so on and so forth. You take the same group and put them online. Do you think they're not vulnerable online? They are, right? So there's no equality on the internet.
Maybe.
In the same proportion, maybe, right? So there's no equality because, like I said, there's no equity, even in a technological platform, right? So there cannot be equality.
But it's an
only
enabler
through.
that could.
Absolutely it is. It's an amplifier. It's an enabler. You can really take your message across the country, and which is what has been terrific with the National Resource Center, because on one click, you're able to get the information that you probably were not able to get in before 10 years. So that's terrific. But will that actually translate into things becoming better on the ground? Will victims be protected? Will children be abused less? Will girls have more autonomy and power? I don't think
Can't
so.
say. Okay, so this is one last question to the panel, a common question to all of you. Before we open the floor for questions with the audience, we know that we are, addressing a corporate audience. So what will be your advice to people who want to make it to the top? Starting with Nishtha.
I was in the private sector for many, many years before I came to the UN. And I was with the government before, so I've kind of been all through all sectors. The stories of women are not different anywhere else. But the one thing that I think is really important is to be fearless in your ask. When we conceive of something, we do it. Most of the times, I think what limits us is we don't conceive the change in our own minds because we're limited by the realities around us. So be fearless. If you've conceived of it in your mind, I have no doubts that we will get there. I'm also very happy that we've been speaking about gender equality now for a very long time as the world together. But this is actually the first time in history where gender equality is an actual possibility. It's an actual possibility. So if we all, men, women, company, state, push hard enough, we actually might see that change that we desire to see. That brings unparalleled responsibility and onus on those in the room because we have the opportunity to actually steer in that change.
So fearless in your ask, ladies. The second suggestion, Shruti ma'am.
So I think it's very simple. Of course we have to be fearless, of course we have to ask, of course we have to believe in ourselves, all those lovely cliches that we've heard all our life. My simple request is, when you're believing in yourself, when you're asking, please take the world along with you. Because हम जब ये आंदोलन करने की कोशिश करते हैं ना, हम सबको alienate कर देते हैं. There is no आंदोलन. It's basic economic sense for women to work. Double income घर पे आती है, घर में ज़्यादा चीज़ें आती हैं. The man understands this. Women in the workforce, definitely doing a better job. You've heard all the men even here today, right? We do better at managing, we're better at understanding people, we're more committed, we're more loyal, blah, 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 blah. It's common sense, and people have understood that. You don't have to fight that basic battle today. What you're fighting now is the rise to the top. See, I'm not worried about the bottom of the pyramid. Bottom of the pyramid, aa jata hai. It's rising up the hierarchy, that's a problem. That's where you lose out your fight. And you know why you lose that out? Because we start picking up slogans, we start fighting the battle, we start saying, mera right, mera ye. And that's when everyone around you says, oh my God, she's a feminazi. These labels came about because we went overboard. Take the men along, take the society along. You're the driver. Honestly, nobody has a clue. So if you keep your brains with you, you'll manage it. And I like to, sort of end this with a quote from Invictus. It's a lovely poem. See the movie if you can one day.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with feminism. It has everything to do with who you are. And the two lines that sum up that poem are, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. You have it in you, you'll make it happen. You will change the world around you. So, God bless you for that.
So let me complete that last paragraph. It says, no matter how straight the gate, no matter how tough the scroll, I am the master of my fate and I am the captain of my soul. So lovely. So after being fearless in your ask, the second suggestion is that take everyone along. The more inclusive you are, the more accepted you become. Let's hear the third suggestion.
Yeah, I'm going to give you very simple suggestions. Firstly, I think as women, take a deep breath, first of all, and make sure that you feel alive in whatever you choose. You might choose not to run the rat race, it's okay. But even when you choose that, make sure that you feel alive in that journey, in that process. It's your journey, right? So you have to feel convinced about it. But there's one thing that I usually use when people ask me, when will you settle down? I say only dust settles. So do not settle down. Do not settle for things that you think are not meant for you. And it could be something at work, it could be something in your house, but if you think this is not what you want, Do not settle for it. Be unapologetic about your aspirations, professional or personal, and you have the right to grab them like any other individual would have the right to, whether a man or a woman.
Wow.
And the last thing I want to tell women and men is self-care is extremely important. Because at the end of the day, the society around us will tell us that you have to be the change, you can be what you want to be. And we can't be exhausted when we are being the change, right? We have to care for oneself. So don't be apologetic about caring for oneself. Yeah.
Wow, I love the part on being alive, you know what the world needs. Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs is people who've come alive. How beautifully said.